Over the course of my life, from the age of around 8 to my very early 20s, I would have some recurring themes in dreams. The bulk of the actual dreams themselves could differ greatly, but there would be elements that would appear over and over again. Most notably, and for the purpose of the story, there was a set of figures which I could later come to refer to as the Faceless Man. It should become apparent why I chose to call them that, as the story continues. Giving an exhaustive account of every dream they appeared would make the story too long, so instead, I'll tell you about dreams. I'll be using these dreams as examples of four ways the figures might appear in my dreams between the ages of 8 and 20 something. The first dream is the earliest I can remember. I refer to its type as an incidental dream where the figures appear in the background, not doing anything necessarily, they're just there. In the dream, me and the young girl about my age are just going around looking at stuff. And at one point, we walk up to a building that has some vines growing up the side of it. She refers to it as an ostrich tree. I don't know why, and then we decide to climb it. As we scale the vines, they become thicker and more numerous, and eventually, it's like climbing up a massive set of trees. The canopy above us gets denser and thicker until it's blocking out all the light from above. And eventually, we come to a wooden deck and begin to pull ourselves up onto it. She manages to pull herself up first, and just as I manage to do the same, I hear her scream the name Jason. As I look up, I see three figures hanging from nooses that stretch up into the darkness of the canopy above us. I'm immediately pushed backwards off of the deck by some invisible force and fall into the inky blackness just before I wake up. The figure in the middle was a blonde haired boy about my age at the time, hanging limp, while the other four were generic figures, obscured by the darkness and shadows of the canopy. I didn't think much of them at the time, but looking back on it, I definitely think these are the same figures from later dreams. The second dream I had when I was in my early to mid teens, and it's a type of call observational. In these dreams, the faceless men appear, kind of in the background, but seem to clearly be observing the main action of the dream. Only observing, though, not interacting. The majority of this dream takes the form of a teen romantic comedy, and my perspective the entire time being essentially where the camera would be, with a protagonist girl who's nerdy and unpopular despite being actress level pretty. The nice guy best friend who has a crush on her but will never say anything. A mean girl antagonist who's super popular, and the dumb hot jock that the main girl is attracted to for some reason. Pretty standard fare up until one of the scenes that I'm being forced to watch during my sleep. And everybody kind of just goes about their business. Nothing happening, just people hanging out at a summer camp for a little bit. Until eventually, everybody heads back to the cabins for sleep. No particular action happening. I'm just watching people now. But then my perspective shifts towards the mean girl. He's sleeping in one of the bunks, and I'm looking down over her from the ceiling. As my perspective slowly gets closer and tighter on her, until eventually, I see a gloved hand come in from outside of my field of vision, grabs hold of her mouth, and then two other hands begin stabbing her to death. It's a very sudden, unupsetting change in tone, and it goes on for a little bit, until eventually they let go and stop as the figures begin to walk away. My perspective begins to follow them out of the room. For a moment, my perspective passes over a window of the cabin. It's not focused on it. The window just happens to be caught in my field of vision as I'm following them out of the room. And as I do so, there's a faceless man standing outside of the window. Here, I'll give a more detailed description of what I mean by a faceless man. A faceless man is a featureless humanoid with no orifices or features of any kind. No ears, hair, nose, eyes, mouth, etc. They're sometimes entirely nude, but can sometimes have clothes on. For example, in this dream specifically, he was wearing what looks like a t-shirt. But in the previous, they were all nude with no primary or secondary sexual characteristics. No breasts or genitals or Adam's apples, and their physique is neither masculine nor feminine. They're also entirely monochrome with no skin tone or color whatsoever. I only see the faceless man very briefly outside of the window, before my perspective takes me away from them, and I eventually find out that the people who killed her were both the jock and the nice guy best friend. That's not important for this. The third dream that I will be using as an example for the third type of dream they might appear in I've labeled proactive. In these dreams, we see them begin to interact with the environment in ways that either instigate or prolong the main action of a dream. At no point will they directly interact with the dreamer, me. I had this dream when I was a little older than 10. I was standing in the parking lot outside of a large building, which to me feels like a hospital. But in retrospect, not a lot for me to be able to really call it a hospital. It's kind of just a generic large building with large glass doors. Except that there is no glass. No glass in the doors, none of the windows, nothing. There's also no sky, no sun, no stars, no moon, just inky blackness, and the only source of light is street lamps that are scattered throughout the parking lot that I'm standing in. Looking away from the building, I can see that the parking lot goes on for what looks like forever, though eventually it disappears into the darkness. There are no lights on inside the building, and I can see no furniture or anything inside of it except for a young girl about my age, lying unconscious on a stretcher. I feel compelled to get out to the building, but at the same time, I feel equally, if not more so, compelled to not enter the building. I know that I cannot and should not enter, but I can't describe why. So I do my best to reach through the empty windows to try and grab this stretcher, to pull it closer, so that I can get her out of the building. I reach and stretch and try as I might, she's just out of reach. Until eventually, I'm finally able to get the tip of my finger around the lip of the stretcher, only for a faceless man to come walking over out of the darkness of the building and calmly move the stretcher just out of my reach again. I don't seem to notice them inside the dream, and I certainly don't acknowledge them, and they don't acknowledge me. I simply try again, only for them to come back out of the shadows again as I'm able to get to the tip of my finger around the lip and move it out of my reach again. I don't know how many times this happens, but this continues over and over until I eventually wake up. This final dream is the only example of its type, and while it has faceless men, their unusual behavior, atypical appearance, and the fact that it's the last time I've ever been visited by the faceless man, brings me to believe that I should categorize it as its own separate thing, and that it deserves mentioning. I've labeled it a midnight event, purely because it sounds cool. The dream opens on a young woman about my age. I'm in my late teens at this time, waving goodbye to someone out the front door of the house. I get the sense that she's a babysitter and she's looking after a very young child. She closes the door and walks into the kitchen, where she sees the child having a number of pots and pans out from the cupboard full of water and just playing in them. She knows that she's going to have to clean this up later, but she thinks that it's cute and decides to play with the child. At this point, there's an immediate tonal shift as the bright sunny weather outside immediately becomes overcast and the child just disappears. She looks around confused before grabbing a box of matches and struggles to light one. As she does so, the ambient light of the scene dims more and more, with the environment around her disappearing until finally she's able to get one lit. Despite having a source of light, she keeps her eyes closed tight, really tight, and holds the match in front of her face out of the darkness. There are hands reaching and stretching up towards her, trying to touch her hands and the wrinkles. Old looking and monochrome, completely without colour. They look weathered. For some reason, she blows out the match and the same goes black. There's a couple of beats and then there's a light again, but this time it's coming from a flip lighter as a man lights a cigarette in his mouth. As he does so, the light from the lighter causes the world around him to light up. As he takes a draw off the cigarette, he closes the lighter and puts it in the pocket of his jacket. The man looks like he's in his mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s at most. A slightly disheveled appearance, dirty blonde hair, tired expression, and roughly looks like John Constantine from DC Comics. However, at the time of having the dream, I'd never seen John Constantine from DC Comics or a depiction of him, so Lord knows where I got that image from. He takes a couple more draws from his cigarette before leaving it in his mouth and putting his hands in his pockets as he starts to walk down the streets of some big city. As he walks, I get the idea that he's been looking for something for a long time, but hasn't been able to find it, and it's close to giving up. He's tired and frustrated and bitter. As he's walking down the street, he walks past men, women, children, but all of them are faceless men. Some look like men in business suits. Others are women in floral dresses pushing strollers that have babies with no faces. And all around him is the noise of the city cars honking at people, talking, someone's phone going off as he just walks past them, not acknowledging them, and they don't acknowledge him. But then suddenly he stops in his tracks, and as he does so, there's the city around him, there's no longer any cars on the streets, and all of the faceless men around him are stopped still in the cracks. It's dead quiet. As he stares in front of him, as if he realizes something, he throws his brows for a minute and says, "Gotcha," and pulling one of his hands from his pockets, quickly swings it around behind him and fish hooks the mouth of a man who's standing behind him. This man is old, like a really old crypt keeper's younger brother. And I know he's the same as the other people. He's a faceless man, but he has a face. He's monochrome like they are and has no junk and is entirely nude. But he has features. He has thin, wispy hair, thick eyebrows, a hooked nose, long earlobes, a mouth that John currently has his finger in. To this date, it's the only example of a faceless man with a face, which feels significant, especially since this is also the last faceless man I ever see. I get a sense of satisfaction from John as he's still facing in front of him, feeling triumphant, before he whips himself around to face the old man, only for the entire cityscape to suddenly disappear, and the dull, overcast light turns into a harsh, oversaturated, orangey yellow, with strong winds whipping back John's jacket. As he now stands in the middle of what looks like a desert, dry, arid soil, dead trees, and an orange-red sky. The most shocking thing is that the faceless man with a face has been replaced by an amorphous blob of features. Patches of different kinds of hair, fingers and teeth, eyes, and one massive gaping maw that is his hand is resting on the side of, and as John looks into the wet hole full of teeth in front of him, there's a deep booming comes through saying, "Not in this place." As soon as the voice is finished, John whips himself back around, facing away from where the old man was. And there's nothing behind him. The city is back. The bright sunny sky is back. The city is full and bustling again. And all of the people around him are in full color with faces and expressions, and going about their daily lives as if none of that happened, except that his finger is still wet. And then I wake up. Full-time firefighter paramedic. Been on the job for 17 plus years, and I've never experienced anything like this before or since. I want to start by saying I'm a rational adult, and I believe in rational, scientific explanations for things. But for this, I got nothing. A few years back, we responded to a call around 3 or 4 a.m. for an elderly male with chest pain. On scene, we found a 96-year-old man complaining of crushing substernal chest pain that started around 9 p.m. Tough old guy said, "I figured, hell, I'll sleep it off." Of course, it got progressively worse throughout the night, so his wife got sick of his complaining and made him call 911. Layout of the house was typical for a single-story ranch. Front door into living room, hallway to the right that leads into the bedroom. We were in with the patient. To the left leads into the kitchen and dining room with a door leading to the attached garage. I was in the bedroom with another medic. Our third guy was sitting at the kitchen table, putting the patient's info into the computer for the run report. As we started treating the man, he went into cardiac arrest and we immediately began CPR. While heading back out to the truck to get supplies, I yelled to our other medic in the kitchen to get in the bedroom and help out. We shocked the man, and to everyone's surprise, immediately got a rhythm back. As we were loading the patient for transport, I asked the wife, who's also about a century old and in her nightgown, if she wanted to ride with us to the hospital so she could be with her husband. She was obviously in shock from everything going on and seemed hesitant to leave the house not dressed, but we needed to move with purpose. We asked if their children lived by and if she could get a ride, as we needed to transport right now. She said no, our daughter lived in another state. Suddenly, our third guy, the ones getting the patient's info into the kitchen, says, "Well, can your son drive you?" To which she responded, "We only have a daughter." This confused my partner, but there was no time for further discussion, and we brought the man to the ER. Believe it or not, he survived after coding a total of 11 times. After the call, myself and the other medic looked at our partner and asked what that was all about back at the house regarding him referring to their son. He told me right before I went to get him from the kitchen, a middle-aged man walked right by him. He said that he looked just like the old man but had dark brown hair and thought it must be their son, as he was wearing a white t-shirt and blue pajama pants and seemed half asleep when he walked by. Figured he came out of his bedroom, that all of the commotion woke him or something. He said the man didn't acknowledge him. He yawned and sort of bumped into the kitchen cabinet before opening the door to the garage and going out into it. He never turned the light on, simply turned back around, closed the door, and walked back past him and turned the corner to the hallway. Apparently, that was when I came around the corner to tell him to go in there to help out. Our partner said, "You had to have practically bumped right into him in the hall." There was nobody else in this house. I saw no one. It was just the elderly couple that lived there. Here's the part that bothers me the most. The old man, our patient, was wearing a white t-shirt and blue plaid pajama pants. So what the fuck did our partner see? Was it our patient's ghost, spirit, or whatever? Too freaking weird to wrap my brain around it. None of us could ever explain it, and our partner still doesn't like to talk about it, even years later. So I suffer from migraines, and I sleep a lot post-migraine because it helps with the pain. Recently, I've been taking melatonin to help keep me asleep, and a lot of people said it gave them weird dreams. And I thought they were joking, until I started having them. The first few were a little scary, then they got weird, but the most recent ones I had were of a girl. So far, I've only had 2 dreams of her. In the first one, I was in an arcade and I kept floating up towards the ceiling. And I got so frustrated because it wouldn't stop. She grabbed my hands and pulled me down, and I don't literally remember anything else. In the second one, we're face to face and her hair and clothes are soaked. I remember Swan Lake was playing in the background, but I fell asleep listening to it, so that part isn't as strange. A few days ago, my friends and I went to our city's county fair. We went at night and they wanted to go on a Ferris wheel. I'm the friend that holds everyone's shit, so I stayed behind. I looked at the lines for the other rides and actually got goosebumps when I saw her. It's like she teleported from my dreams to right in front of me. I think she was with other people because she was laughing, but I couldn't look away from her. We made eye contact for like a nanosecond, and then she got on the ride. My friends and I walked around for a few more hours, and I ran into her again. My friend apparently knew one of the people she was with, because he went over to them and they started talking. I stayed back, because I was nervous. She waved at me, and I waved back. Okay, well, I kinda waved. I kinda just tossed my hand up super quickly. We left a little while later, and I asked my friend about the girl with the long dark hair, and he's apparently really good friends with her brother. I know I've never met her or her brother before, or seen pictures of them, so I don't know how I dreamt of her. When I was 12, I lived in a town called Steuben, Wisconsin. Look it up. Very small and a beautiful town. I lived in a house with my mom and my older brother at the time, who wasn't home for most of this. One night I was up late, probably around 4 a.m., when I suddenly heard what sounded like somebody standing next to me and breathing. Almost spot on the sound you'd hear if someone inhaled through their nose and then exhaled through their mouth. I got up to try and pinpoint where it was coming from, And every time I thought I was coming close to it, it would move and suddenly be behind me or in another corner of the kitchen. Once I realized that, I went straight up to my mom until sunrise, which was above the kitchen. When the sun came up, I went down and my mom was awake, and I went to her and told her I wanted to tell her about something, and she said she wanted to tell me something too. So I went first and told her what I had heard, and her response was that she was about to tell me the same thing, that she had been getting up early some mornings and sitting in the kitchen on the computer and hearing this breathing sound. After that, this thing came around for a good 2 weeks or so, every night in the middle of the night. Until one time, I finally broke down and screamed at it to leave us the hell alone. And it immediately stopped and never returned after that. Another time, I was laying on my bed on the phone and talking to my friend in another town when my mattress started shaking violently. It wasn't an earthquake or anything like that because it was only the mattress that shook. I felt exactly like someone had walked up to it, grabbed it, and just started shaking it like crazy. Whenever family members would visit in this house, they would always think they saw someone going up our stairs. One night I slept in our living room by myself with nothing on and distinctly heard someone whisper my name to me. Lots of other things happened while living there too, including weird stuff outside. I'm in my 30s now and I've never been able to come up with a satisfying explanation as to what could have been making that breathing sound, or how it was able to move around and react to me yelling at it. This has been going on for a couple years now, but it hasn't got to me until now. I work as a paddling coach in Ottawa, Canada. I coach sprint kayak and canoe, dragon boat, stand-up paddleboard, and an assortment of other boats. I work year round, but when the water opens up, I work out of a camp 10 minutes outside of the city. The club is surrounded by deep woods and several other camps. The plot of land next to where I worked is owned by the YMCA and used for a summer camp, but the camp only takes up about a quarter of the area. The rest of the forest is filled with a spider web of deep wood trails that go on for kilometers. I used to train my athletes on the trails, but for a couple of years now, we haven't been allowed to use them. Anytime we go on the trails now, a representative of the YMCA usually comes and kicks us off. It all started about 2 years ago. I was upriver a ways coaching a dragon boat session. We were paddling alongside the shoreline owned by the YMCA, and just as we were taking a break, I heard the most chilling scream coming from the woods not too far from shore. It sounded like a woman's, but it sounded really off, as though she was struggling to get air or something. The whole boat stopped moving and stopped to listen. It was quiet for a long time, until I asked if anyone had heard that. The dragon boat holds 22 people, and just as I asked, everyone looked at me and nodded. People were quiet for a while to see if it would happen again. The first incident happened late in the summer, so I assumed it was just a camp kid screaming at a bug or something. It happens. When we didn't hear it again, we decided to continue the workouts. Just as we got going, however, it happened again. Still the same gargled scream just beyond the tree line, and again everyone in the boat stopped to listen. I wasn't 100% sure what to do. I had never dealt with anything like this before. It was one of those things that you question constantly, not sure if what you heard was legit or not. I beached the dragon boat on shore just so we could take a look. Everyone was guessing that the source of the scream could not be more than beyond the tree line. A couple of the guys and I took a look around but couldn't see anything. It was honestly a really chilling situation. We all eventually decided to call it a day and head back. I assumed it was just a camp group hiking the trails and it eventually left my mind. Fast forward to last summer. I heard the screams again, only a handful of times over the season. I can't say how many times, but it couldn't have been more than 3. Each time it would happen, me and whoever I was with could never find where it was coming from. It was always the stretch of beach owned by the YMCA, never anywhere else. This all happened at different points of the summer. I was never just part of one season. I want to say that this wasn't the only weird shit going on at the club. Besides the odd disembodied screaming, myself and others would hear a few different sounds coming from the woods by the club. This would include a weird rasping wind blowing through the forest, immediately followed up by the sound of what can only be described as someone gutting a fish, but really loudly. It's so hard to explain, but I want to do the sound justice because it's just chilled me to the bone. The worst thing I've experienced at work is somewhat too common nowadays. It usually happens when I have my younger training group with me. With this group, I coach mostly sprint canoe and sprint kayak, and the group ranges in ages from the youngest being 12 to the oldest being 17. I train the kids after school, and sometimes we go late just before the sun sets. Sometimes I'm stuck closing up the plug in the dark with the kids, which is when it usually happens. From time to time, when it's just on the cusp of being dark out, me and my athletes hear footsteps coming from the woods that surround us. They always stop just short of the tree line. It doesn't sound like someone running through the trails or anything, but as if someone is walking through the underbush. Just as we hear it, me and the kids always fall silent and look at the exact same place. This usually prompts everyone to drop whatever they're doing and hightail it to the parking lot to drive off. Now, all of this would have been fine. I'm a tough guy. I don't scare easily. At least I didn't think so. But a couple of days ago, something finally put me over the edge. It's been an exceptionally warm spring in Canada, which has allowed me to start work on the water 3 or 4 weeks earlier than usual. I was out on the water with a dragon boat crew, and we were paddling up and down the range of beaches owned by the YMCA. Again, it happened. Everyone stopped paddling and just stared at the stretch of beach. The screams sounded different now, still female, but really demonic. All of my hair stood on end. The whole boat laughed awkwardly, assuming it was just a member of the club or a member of the YMCA hiking the old trails. But I didn't laugh. It hit me almost immediately. It couldn't have been a member of our club because I was the last booking of the night. And it couldn't have been any members of the YMCA because it was too early in the season. The YMCA camp hasn't been opened for the season yet. That was the other night, and I haven't decided what to do. The whole thing has put me on edge, and I haven't allowed myself to stay later than 8 these last couple of days. It isn't just me either. I spoke to some of the other coaches at the club, and all of them have heard the screams. We all just don't know what to do about it. The screams usually happen a couple of times a summer, and usually in twos. So I'll try to get a video of it happening if I can. My wife and I have a son, and when he was big enough to move to a toddler bed, we decided to put a hook-eye lock on his bedroom door, because his door doesn't actually latch shut. You just need to push on it, and it opens. This way, if he gets up and tries to open his door to roam around the house at night, he won't be able to. But it isn't a strong or complicated enough lock to be a hindrance during an emergency. It's been 2 years of using a hook-eye lock with no issues. It became more of a comfort thing for my son. It doesn't really do anything at this point. He can just open the door regardless, but he likes to hear us latch it at night. We recently moved, and about 2 weeks ago, I put him to bed, latched the lock, turned around, took a couple steps, and heard the hook fall. So I turned around and it swung unlatched. I opened his door and he's laying in bed, burritoed up in his blankets. So I think he ran to the door, went to open it, heard me out there still, and ran back to bed. Then later that week, my wife says that his door was wide open when she got up for work, but he was sound asleep, so she closed it. Whatever he might have woken up before, realized everyone was still sleeping, and went to bed. Then last week, he comes running into my room after my wife leaves for work and says, "Dada, you opened my door." I said no. Must have been Mama before she left for work. My wife says when she gets home, his door was closed when I woke up this morning. Weird. Then today, my wife watches the latch lift up out of the lock, fall, and his door open on its own. She isn't a believer in the paranormal. I've been telling her for years that weird shit like this happens to me all the time. She always calls me crazy, and now she's seen it for herself. But also, if anyone has a genuine explanation for this, please tell me, because she's very freaked out, and honestly, it bothers me too. because it's my son. I think it's kind of cool when I see and experience stuff, but I don't want him to be scared. I grew up in a home in New England. The house was built in the 70s and no one died there, but it was built on unclaimed land at the time. Anyways, I lived there from when I was 5 until when I was 19, and I can always remember some creepy things happening to me there. I'll start with a softball that could have been the result of a faulty door, or more realistically, someone who tried to break in. One night when I was 8, my whole family and I woke up to my dog barking downstairs. When we went down there, she was sitting in front of our front door, which was wide open. Naturally, me and my sisters freaked. My dad, being the no nonsense Air Force guy he was, searched the house with our dog and explained it as the wind and that we needed to get the door fixed. My dad could have been right, but I never remembered it being a windy night. There was no damage to our door, no crowbar marks from someone trying to pry it open, no new scratches on the locks, etc. But I think the freakiest thing that scared me was if there was a threat, whether it be a person or an animal. My dog for sure would have tried to chase after it. This is the only instance I shared with my whole family. The rest going forward are instances I experienced alone. When I was a little older, I felt that whatever presence was in my house was trying to get me to notice it. On a handful of occasions, I'd wake up from a loud noise, almost like a door slamming, followed by what sounded like heavy footsteps that would go up my stairs halfway and then stop. I could never muster up the courage to check. I remained in bed paralyzed with fear and dread. This one similarly may have an explanation. My older sister recently admitted to us that when she was a teenager, she would often sneak out only to return late at night. The only thing with that is, as I mentioned, my dad was in the Air Force, and while he was still our goofy, fun-loving dad, he was not someone you wanted to piss off. You'd think my sister would try to be as quiet as she could, slowly closing the front door and tiptoeing up the stairs carefully to not wake anyone. Not slamming the door with such force it would wake me up and stomping on our worn stairs that creak when walking up them. This could be a coincidence, and I could very well be relying too heavily on my childhood memory, which is likely to embellish. These next 3 instances I'm about to explain happened to me when I was older, 11 to 14, and are still very fresh in my memory. One night, I was watching TV, and all of a sudden, I felt my body vibrating. My room seemed brighter. Loud white noise drowned out the noise from the show, and I felt this energy walk through me in my bed. It felt like a few seconds, but when it was over, I was sweating and panting, trembling from whatever just happened to me. I didn't tell anyone at the time because I didn't know how to explain it. I guess looking back, maybe I could have had a seizure, but I was a relatively healthy child, and this never happened to me before or ever again. Then, the singing. It was late at night, and it was definitely past my bedtime. I was watching The Raven in my room. It was when I felt tired and turned off the TV that it started. A soft, slow, melancholy sounding humming. I sat up from my bed, thinking my mom must have fallen asleep on the couch and that the TV was on. I got out of bed to check, only because that mentioned scenario happened so often. I was surprised to find my living room empty and the TV off. I didn't panic, however. Our TV was interesting in the sense that we had a box for the TV audio, and if you didn't turn that off but turned the TV itself off, you were left with a black screen and the audio still playing. It must have been that someone forgot to turn off the audio and some freaky movie was on with a creepy kid. I went to the box to find it completely off. Starting to feel a little unsteady, I decided to go back upstairs and try to get some sleep, rationalizing that it was in my head. When I turned off the light and got under the covers, it started again but slightly louder. I sat up in my bed once more, jumping out of it and walking to my door, quickly opening it and stepping out into the hallway. I was met with silence. I went back into my room, locked my door, like that was going to help, and got back into bed. It started again, louder and discordant. almost like there were two voices and they were trying and failing to meet each other's pitch. I had enough and turned my TV on so that the raven in the hopes of drowning out the noise. The next morning, I brought it up to my mom and she stated she slept through the night and heard nothing. I try to wrap my head around what could have been the logical explanation for why I heard the humming. I can't think of anything. If any of you rationalists have a thought, please feel free to share it. The next and last instance that I'll mention is what broke me and had me convinced my home was haunted, or I alone was being haunted, as no one else had any occurrences. I lived on a dead-end street that many cars think has an outlet onto the main road, but only get turned around at the end of my neighborhood. As such, it was not uncommon for cars to pass by our house, their lights briefly illuminating my room before it went to black. Something woke me up one night, but I couldn't place it. It wasn't a sound or a feeling, I simply just woke up. I saw the familiar sight of some poor sap trying to find their way, only to realize they were going to have to backpedal. The car came closer and closer, and then it made the famous left turn that illuminated my room. It was when my room was lit up. I saw her. She was in the corner of my room. She was a colourless, tall, and lanky figure. Her limbs were malnourished, her hair greasy, long and gnarled, covering the left half of her face. She wore a dress that was tattered and filthy. She first looked as though she was going to walk across my room, until it looked like she was going to turn towards me. In a flash, the car had passed by my room, and as a result of my room going dark again, she was gone. I turned on my light immediately, thinking this would keep me safe. I started crying and shaking. The figure I saw was so horrible, broken, and seemed destitute. After this, I finally told my mom the next morning, stating that I didn't want to sleep in my room anymore. My mom, not wanting to have a 14-year-old basket case, told me that she experienced the things I had once before as well. My aunt, who died young of cancer, used to seemingly visit her in her dreams, bringing other dead figures with her. My mother told her that she had to stop and leave her be, and she never had those dreams again. At that point, I was willing to try anything. In the afternoon, I went up to my room. I faced the corner of my room where I saw her. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I wish I could help, but you have to stop. You have to go. Please." Contrary to how this post has been written thus far, I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see an apparition. I didn't feel a spirit lift. I felt nothing. All I know is I never experienced anything seemingly paranormal ever again in that house after I said what I said. My parents ended up divorcing, and my mother and I sold the house to live in a condo. A little girl and her family moved in. She was around the age I was when these incidents started happening. I think she was going to bunk down in my room. For context, I've been living in this house all my life, and when we got married, my wife moved in here with me. This house is a 3-story high and is owned by my mom. My wife and I live in a room on the 3rd floor. Yes, I still live with my mom, but only because I can't leave her alone, and she's already old and exhibiting signs of dementia. Going back, when I was a kid, I've seen a lot of otherworldly entities here. A red, see-through woman who smiled at me before walking downstairs. An old man who clearly was very sick because he was so thin and his teeth are all in bad shape. And yes, he was smiling at me too. I saw him sitting right next to me on my bed, his face about 6 inches away from mine when he woke me up. This time, at maybe 2 a.m., I was roused from sleep by what sounded like small feet running around our room. It was so clear, but I cannot tell what it was exactly as I cannot turn to look at it. I eventually woke up thanks to my wife, who heard me grunting in my sleep. It turns out I was having sleep paralysis. When we went back to sleep, I woke up 3 different times after that, all because my wife was having nightmares and was grunting and moaning. And when I woke her up, she said that there were some things that were bothering her in her sleep. She too was having sleep paralysis, and it kept on 2 more times. Pissed off, because I couldn't seem to have a peaceful sleep. I addressed the entities in our room and told them that if they will not let us be, I'll do my best to drive them out of our house. After my brief rant, we decided to sleep again, but not more than 5 minutes had passed. A stack of wine cartons fell down and woke us up. There's no way those would have fallen down because there's no air or any kind of draft that is blowing into our room. Our room is like a sealed box because we spent money making it that way. It seems they don't want us sleeping. I don't know why. A few weeks back, my fiance surprised me with a birthday weekend away at a very old, very popular South Carolina city. She had the whole weekend planned with sightseeing and extravagant dinners, but as a history buff and someone who's genuinely curious yet terrified of ghosts, was most excited for the haunted bar tour she'd booked. The irony is my encounter took place when we were preparing for the haunted ghost tour. The haunted bar tour was booked for a little later on in the afternoon, and since half the point of the tour was drinking, we decided to get the party started at lunch. My fiance was able to land a lunch reservation at a pretty popular spot in this city that happens to bear the name of a dog that used to occupy the building. So after we've been seated and got our drinks, twice I caught a sort of white mist at the very edge of my peripherals. Not smoke-like, but like a rich white cloud you'd see at midday. I didn't think much of it, being that we were seated with my back to the door that led to a balcony that was also full of patrons, so waitresses were constantly running back and forth behind me. It could have been anything. After the second time, I asked my fiance, did the waitress just spray Lysol behind me? She said no. Why do you keep looking over your shoulder? Conversation at that point changed, and I pretty much forgot about the white mist. A short time later, after we finished our meal, the waitress came to clear the table. I wasn't paying attention to her as she was clearing the plates, but thinking back, I can't really explain what happened here. But it felt as if while the waitress was cleaning the table, she dropped a plate or a few utensils, because the sensation I felt was as if something splattered or hit against my leg, from my ankle up to about my knee. Since I was in the middle of a conversation with my fiance, my reaction was dang, eye roll and grab my napkin. But when I bent down, my leg was as clean as a whistle. I also noticed the waitress was halfway back to the kitchen at this point. Huh? The fuck? Whatever, we're going to be late. Let's get the bill. First stop on the tour was a bar on the other side of the city. How the tour operated was we'd go to the haunted bar, the group grabs a drink, and after everyone gets back to the table, we get the history on why this particular location is haunted. Since my fiance and I were one of the first ones back to the table with just the guide there, I broke the ice with, hey, is the restaurant haunted? The tour guy replied, oh, it's very haunted. It's actually the last stop on this tour. We giggled, and at this point I still didn't register what had happened. It didn't all click until we got to the end of the tour back at the restaurant, as we all gathered around the guide for his spiel. The gist of it was that it was named after the dog they found buried underneath the front entrance when they were renovating or something. He pointed to a painting someone did of the dog, and of course it's a little white dog. The whiteness of its coat was on par with the white mist I saw earlier that day. He even went on to say the dog haunts the restaurant and will come by and rub up against your leg. Holy shit. Not to squeeze the juice out of this or turn it into a sob story, but to put it into context, about a year ago, my 2 family dogs died in a sudden, tragic, and super shitty way. And as someone who's an animal lover, who's had a pet their entire life, I thought about the 2 of them constantly. After everything clicked in my head, my only reaction was just something like a comforting warmth and genuine flattery that the dog picked me to come up and rub up against. Maybe almost a sign that my dogs were okay, which is what I needed, because what hurt the most about losing my 2 family dogs was I never got to say goodbye to them, something I was thankfully able to do with all previous pets. Many years ago, I was a bored teenager in the house alone on a Saturday afternoon, and decided to make a Ouija board from, of all things, A travel Scrabble set. Dumb, right? Nevertheless, I made it, grabbed a glass and tried to make contact with who or whatever was there in the great beyond. Just because. Several times I asked, "Is there anybody there?" Now, I wasn't really expecting anything to happen, and for a few moments, nothing did. But then the glass started to move under my finger towards the corner of the board with tiles arranged to spell yes. That was enough for me. I returned the glass to the kitchen and hastily disassembled the board, suitably freaked out. Now, I'm prepared to believe in hindsight that maybe I unconsciously moved the glass myself, but I was pretty scared at the time. The house suddenly felt oppressive, and I felt ill at ease enough to want to get out of there as soon as possible. So I locked up and decided to get on my bike and ride to a friend's place to be around other people and relax. The journey took about 15 minutes, but the oppressive, uneasy feeling stayed with me the whole way. When I arrived at my friend's house, I knocked on the back door and got no response. Peering through the windows, it was plain there was no one home. I decided to try another friend, and again there was nobody home. In all, I tried 6 or 7 friends, cycling some distance between all of the houses. This was in quite a rural area, and no one was home. Not my friends, not their family members, no one. In every case, I peered through the window, each time feeling increasingly paranoid and not a little desperate. And in each case, no one was there at all. And this is the weird part. Every time I peered into their window, I could see my friend's high school photo of that year, staring back at me and smiling. Smiling very oddly, in a very unearthly way. I felt very conscious that I was being watched by something that seemed to manifest through the photos. It's hard to describe exactly, but it felt that in each instance, I was expected. Like the photos knew I was coming and knew I'd be alone without the safety of other people. The best way I can think to describe it is that it felt like I was being toyed with by something playfully malevolent, if that makes any sense at all. By the time of the last house, I had travelled miles and used up most of the afternoon, and so, tentatively, I returned home. My family were there at this point, and the place, thankfully, felt normal again. When I asked what I'd done with my day, I simply said I'd been on a bike ride, and that was that. I'm aware that most of this can be chalked up to a mixture of coincidence and the power of suggestion, but the whole experience felt uncanny. When I saw their photos again in following visits, they looked perfectly normal, of course, but I can't decide whether I'd worked myself up into a state of near delusion or if something else actually happened. I guess I'll never know. My wife and I bought our first house about 8 years ago or so. We've since sold it, but we've often had strange experiences there. The biggest thing that was our cabinet would often go when we go into the kitchen, even if neither of us were in there. Items from the cabinet would often be left out, even when not used. Fairly innocent stuff. Definitely weird. Previously, growing up, I had several occurrences that woke me up at night. 2 notable ones were that I woke up one night to the sound of something being flung at my wall. It sounded like a necklace being whipped around and thrown, ending with a loud smack on the wall. The second time, I was sleeping and woke up to a really loud sound, similar to a dryer with shooting in it, or something to that effect. A loud banging noise in a constant pattern seemed to be right by my bed. Both times, the sounds disappeared as soon as I became fully aware of them. We never seemed to have any actual malicious activity in the house, but one night in particular, we'd been sleeping on the couch because a drunk driver almost ran their car into the house, where our master bedroom was. We had a young daughter at the time, around a year old, who had toys around the house. One of the nights on the couch, my wife woke me up in a panic. Apparently, the front room light had turned on momentarily, and she heard the sound of the toys being played with. As soon as she became aware of it, the light shut off and the playing sound stopped. She's not the type to embellish, so I got pretty spooked by that one. Nothing much after happened in that house. That was definitely the most chilling. I still get a little shiver when I look back at it. Me and my friends used Ouija boards at our hostel when we were in school. Nothing moved on the board, as usual, but I got intuitions like how the person we were calling looked like. This happened a number of times, and it was accurate to moles, their houses, the kind of glasses they wore, the walking stick, etc. After a month, when I got back home, my mom came across a lot of paranormal stuff. Had the family and house blessed by a priest. Our neighbor too did a few prayers according to their beliefs. I haven't seen the black figure, but I did have a scratch on my back. About 3 years later, I'm in college, and one night around 2 a.m., as I'm walking to my room, I see a black figure a little far away, maybe 30 meters or something. I actually saw it moving from one side to another. The place I saw this was very bright. There were tube lights, and I could see the black figure properly. The next day, my friends were making fun of me, but later that evening, we got info from a friend that it was the first death anniversary of the girl who committed suicide in the women's hostel. This is incident one in college. Second one was shortly after this. A week later, I guess. I was smoking in my room, scrolling through Instagram, earphone in one ear. Towards the end of the cigarette, I find myself saying, as if I'm responding to someone talking to me. I then realize I am in fact hearing a woman talk to me, and as slowly as I'm coming to reality, I'm also sensing the black figure right beside me. I slowly dropped my cig and walked out of my room. I had that feeling if I get scared and react, something could happen. Third time, this is the first time I'm actually seeing it properly and this close. Incident 2 was like right beside me, but not facing, sitting beside me. Incident 3 happened a few weeks later. I was at my friend's room, about to leave for my room. I remembered to tell something to my friend and turned around. I see the figure. Lights were off, but there was light from the window behind the black figure, so she was like a silhouette to me. I'm trying not to go too much into the detail as the question is priority. 2 years later, after college, my friend and I were staying together. There, my friend heard knocking. Once, it was like someone just came and hit the door open. He thought I was goofing around. He comes to my room and finds me sitting with a cigarette. I have to say this. I witnessed the face change from a complete rage to shock, to worry and astonishment. Once I saw my friend go to the restroom. 10 minutes later, he again walks to the restroom. I ask him if he's alright. It was 6 a.m. and him using the toilet twice in 10 minutes was not normal. He told me he just woke up. Another time, I was sitting in our hall alone. The lights were switched off and only a dim light was there. I slowly noticed I was so deeply invested in listening to a conversation. There was nobody else in the hall, and somehow I felt like there were people around the table sitting on the chairs, and we were talking. Months pass, and I feel a strong presence of someone outside my door. I open and turn left, and as I turn right, I see the black figure a few feet away from me. I get back in and close the door. Played music at full volume and just didn't think about it. Another friend of ours came to stay with us. He too felt the same, like someone following him, some black entity behind him and moving above him. My uncle came to stay with us. He too felt someone follow him. He asked about the knocks. We just jokingly tell him whatever it is isn't harming us, and as long as it doesn't harm us, we're fine. It's been almost 1 year since the last experience. I somehow was able to take this very lightly, as if nothing had happened. Also, now I'm in Dubai, so I've sort of passed that completely. What triggers it is, I somehow just know some very small personal things before it happens. An accident, sickness and health, a fight in the family, how an interview was going to go, even temperature sometimes. At times, what I say simply happens. This is not just 3 or 4 or 5 times. This happens a lot more than even 20. This particular story happened when I was a senior in high school during 2014. I'm 25 now, and this experience still scares me every now and again. I had a friend, we'll call her Aria, that told me stories of the paranormal activities that happened in her home throughout the 2 years we had been friends. I believed her, but never really thought much of it considering I never experienced anything myself. She specified that her older sister had always played around with a Ouija board a few years prior before moving out. One of the stories Aria told me freaked me out. It was the one night while she was sleeping, she felt a weight on her chest and immediately woke up to see a dark figure standing over her. It gave me chills listening to her explain everything, knowing full well that her sister likely brought something not so nice into the house. I wanted to have dinner and stay the night at Aria's house on Friday after school, so we could have the weekend to hang out. She's a year younger than myself, and with it being my senior year at the time, I wanted to spend as much time with her as possible before I moved. Her mother never really allowed anyone at their house other than myself, and a few of Aria's older brother's friends. Her mother thought I was a good influence for Aria, whatever that meant. Aria's older brother went out to spend time with his own friends, so that left Aria, myself, her mother, and Aria's younger brother. Aria's father worked at the prison in the next town over, so he usually worked very long hours. Sitting in her room with her, Aria and I were getting hungry, so she decided to sneak out of the house later in the night around 10 p.m. to get some snacks. She contacted a friend of ours, we'll call him Henry, to meet at the nearest 24-hour corner store after he offered to pay for our food. Aria's mother was one to stay up fairly late, between 12 and 2 a.m. So I turned off the light in Aria's bedroom after she jumped out our window to hop the fence from the backyard. I wanted to make it look like we were already asleep. The mother was very nosy when I came over to visit, so I wasn't worried, but I wanted to take precautions just in case. Sitting on Aria's bed against the wall, under the window, I started to remember the story she had told me about the entity in her house. Being in near pitch-black darkness, alone in her room, didn't help the situation. I decided to ignore my thoughts and refused to give a reaction out of fear. I started to ask for updates through Henry in order to get a feel on how much longer he and Aria would be. The corner store was less than a mile away, so I assumed the wait wouldn't be too bad. It was completely quiet throughout the entire house, until I started hearing Aria climb the fence to get back over. I moved to the middle of her bed in case she needed me to help her through the window. I inched closer to get a better look outside. It was Aria standing completely still, directly in front of me. It was still dark, so all I could really make out was that it was her silhouette. It was exactly her, down to the height. I didn't think too much of her behaviour, so I stretched my arm out to help her through the window. She continued to stand there, motionless and silent. It dawned on me what it was. I quickly brought my arm back in and sat down on the bed away from the window. The figure didn't move or make a sound, and neither did I. I was frozen there. I eventually laughed it off, refusing to believe it wasn't Aria. I thought she was just playing a joke on me. She knew that I was a bit taken aback from the paranormal experiences she told me about, so I shrugged and crawled back over to help her through. I said, "Very funny, you got me," and extended my arm out again for her to grab. She then walked off to her right, making her way past the side of the house. I brought my head out the window to get a look at what Aria was doing. I said, "Where are you going?" Because the only other entrance to the house was from the backyard was a sliding glass door that led to the kitchen. Her mom would have known she snuck out. After pleading in whispers for Aria to come back as we helped through the window, I heard a very low, taunting laugh. Aria's figure disappeared behind the other end of the house. I jolted my head back inside her room, scared shitless. Part of me knew it wasn't her, but I told myself I needed to remain calm. I grabbed my phone and messaged Henry. I asked him if he had brought Aria back to the house already. He said that he was still a little ways down the street. There were chills running up and down my body. I immediately turned the light to Aria's bedroom back on, feeling slight relief. While what I'd experienced was definitely not something to take lightly, there was something about a well-lit room that made it easier to deal with. I eventually heard the real Aria hop the fence and throw the bag of snacks through the window. I helped her through. Even the way she climbed the fence sounded much different than whatever that thing was pretending to be her. I immediately began to tell Aria what happened. There was no logical explanation to what else it could have been. It definitely wasn't human. She said, "I told you," in a completely calm and nonchalant manner. I knew that Aria had obviously been experiencing the happenings of the entity on her own. but for her reaction to be so plain was not what I expected. After snacking, we finally went to bed. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, so it was easy enough to fall asleep quickly. I woke up in the middle of the night and checked my phone. It was 3 a.m. After putting my phone back on the floor, I shifted towards the wall where Aria was, and she was facing the other end of the room. Her eyes were wide open, staring off in the corner. I asked, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" She didn't answer. She continued to stare in silence. I felt those same chills again, too scared to look over. I mustered up the courage to look anyway. There was a tall, black figure standing in the corner of Aria's bedroom. It looked like the silhouette of a normal human being. That's not all what it was. I didn't get a good enough look to give a greater description because as soon as I saw it, I turned back over and whispered, "Turn around, the wall, and ignore it. Try to go to sleep." Once we turned away from the figure, it never did anything. I was terrified out of my mind what would possibly happen through the rest of the night, but nothing ever did. I've known throughout most of my life that malevolent entities usually only get worse or react violently when given more attention or when antagonized. Us refusing to give it the attention it wanted may have been the reason we didn't experience anything else. I've only had a few paranormal related things happen to me throughout my life, but that memory definitely takes the cake. Two co-workers and an old friend, who had never spoken to each other beforehand, said that they could feel a presence near me at all times. I got a bit scared and asked them what it was, and they said that it felt like it was a young spirit, but harmless. I didn't want to think too much into it at the time because it seemed crazy. I believed them 100%, but I just couldn't mentally grasp it at that time. A few years had passed, and a different close friend of mine stated she could see the spirit attachment. She described the spirit as a young boy, 8 or 9, with blonde hair and blue eyes. He seemed at peace when he was next to me, explaining that he never left my side. She even told me that she knew I was in pain from a colon illness I had, without me even bringing it up, because the spirit attachment was clutching his stomach. Knowing that he was not only attached to me, but could also feel the same pain I was feeling, was extremely interesting. The way she described the boy was just like my older sister. I have brown hair and brown eyes, but my sister has blonde hair and blue eyes. I feel like the details were so strange, and it left me thinking of what my mother had told me about a miscarriage she had before getting pregnant with me. After the surgery she had to have, she didn't want to know the gender because the whole situation was so painful to deal with, of course. I just can't help but wonder whether this attachment is somehow that baby, or if I came across a lone spirit at one point in my life. I used to hang around cemeteries in high school, and when I was around 18 or 19, to pay respects and learn some insight of those that had passed on.